Hey, Laji, this is Samir. I guess we're gonna wait on Steve for a few minutes before we start.
Sabia, hello. How you doing?
Hey, doing good. Is
Yeah,
Steve?
Steve just said he's joining right now.
Okay, cool. Just give it a minute then. Or anybody else that you know is in the lobby or something?
I'm just checking. It looks like here's Steve. He'll be the Orhas project. Hey, Steve.
Hey, folks.
Hey, Steve.
Hey,
Anybody else joining Steve from our side? Samir was just asking. I said, I don't know.
Samir, you sent the invite. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I did, but I also asked it to be added to the CNCF meeting folder. So I'm not sure if this is the first time I'm trying to run this meeting. So making sure there's not a lobby that we need to bring people on from the lobby and all.
No, it's nothing like that. I normally what I would have done is on one-off meetings, you can just do it on the Notary V2 channel or just ping people directly.
Okay.
But that's fine too. Like I was just gonna ping the maintainers of this and just get the key folks involved.
Okay. Yeah, this is being recorded, so if we so we'll definitely be able to share this information. So as preparation for this meeting, I wrote about 2-page worth of content. Let me see if I can share it. What's the best way to share it? Just put it in the chat here.
You can share your screen, or you can paste it, or you can put it in a hack doc, or whatever you'd like.
Yeah, I got a hack doc. So yeah, let me share my hack doc. Okay, let's see if you guys can get the hack doc.
Yep, got it.
While you guys read it for a couple of minutes, or
We
not.
can do the AWS thing.
Yeah, and I can give an overview, but I'll let you familiarize yourself for a few minutes.
It's worked well when we've done it. So well, there's only a couple of us. I'll put my hand up when I finish reading.
Okay.
Anything else?
Hey,
Did
good
you get the
morning.
link, Niaz?
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I think you joined after we pasted it.
All right, there you go. Thank you.
Hey, sorry, I'm late.
Virtual dollar.
Hey, sure, when we're reviewing a doc,
Should we start discussing soon?
Yeah, we can. I was just waiting on Steve to give me a heads up. I thought he was. Oh, you raised your hand. My bad. I didn't see that. Okay, I think we're good to go. Think I've answered most of the comments already as I was going through it. I can share my screen if that will make it easier. Let me see. What's the best way to do that? Okay.
I think, Samir, to kind of make sure we're making the best use of everyone's time here, I see there's feedback along two themes, right? Like one is how to just generally manage the project overall in terms of how we're tracking requirements, how we're defining releases. That I think you can take an iterative approach and look to kind of merge with some of the other pull requests are there. There's a lot of comments in here. I don't know if it's beneficial for all of us to kind of go through it. What I would rather focus the time on is kind of going through the features we have listed and trying to figure out, like, what do we need for like a general release and how do we think about these from a milestones perspective?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what I wanted to spend most time on too. Yeah, it's a good call out on that. This is the area I wanted to focus on, the section 3, and I'm scrolling down to basically what we need to, I propose that we should look at is which one of these features within this epic or within this product category should we target for what release. And releases are, as we discussed, current and next. We can go 2 releases out. And of course, we can put things in backlog as well. That's always the case. But we can go through these buckets and see which one of them makes sense to be in the alpha release, because that's what we're talking about right now. And we can mark that today.
Well, I would not even call it alpha release, right? Like you want us to kind of have a release that everyone here feels like, is a working version of notation that then we can go start building other things against, right? And some of those were going to come out into an alpha release of like, here's something that we want like customers to go test out on or users to go test on. But I think the first thing is for us to kind of say, okay, we have delivered notation in a way where you can now go this end to end to kind of go sign and deploy software and get sort of like your basic test case done. What are the things we feel are needed for that, right? So we could ship that, for example, without revocation of signatures, revocation of certificate, revocation of keys. But what we've agreed to there is we want the spec for that. We don't necessarily need like a working solution, right? So I think what I'd go through is like for one, do we have a definitive list? And are we missing anything here from this list? I think that that's the first pass. And two, for each one of these features, which are the ones that we're going to say, okay, this is a launch blocker for us versus we feel like this is ready for launch.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it as well. Any other comments from anybody?
Just a big plus one. I mean, I think there's a bunch of stuff we can do here asynchronously, but the brain trust of having us all together is really can we cull through those features and figure out what's the priority on which.
Okay.
And maybe we do the things like, here's the scenario that we're trying to land for this release versus the next release, and there might be 1 or 2 or 3 milestones to get there. Reluctant to try to use a specific example, but we've talked about it. Can we just sign stuff and don't care where you get the key? And then we can figure out revocations and policies, and that going through that prioritized list would be, to me, awesome to get some focus on that.
Yeah, so I think we can just jump on that then. But the definition that Nia said, let's aim for the first release, and then not the alpha, but the first release that people can start using it.
Just a build. Just get a build that's not a shoelace branch.
No, I think I agree there. I think like, how we look at alphas may come out of like what's needed, right? So if we, for like a total release, like I think we'd want a signature format. I wouldn't track this as format 1, format 2. I think we need a signature format, right? And I think like, this is one where there is an ongoing discussion. I think we've heard a case for JWS and for PKCS7. We can come back and say what we need for like a a winning standard here, but we need a signature format, right? Like without it, we can't have a release.
Yeah, just to put some context, Shuei's got a signature format that he's been using that's in notation today. I still want to merge what's in it to main have something, but that would be like one of the first things I'd like for us to update is let's generate the format that we believe we want today, which I think to your point is JWS. Is it JWS with PKCS7, or is JWS now? And we want to get to PKCS7 as soon as we can get a Go library that we're comfortable with.
So, and I think this needs further discussion, but my stance on it, which actually may be different from what I think Milind and some of the others may have discussed in the call, is I think PKCS7 is what I'd like to have it release, and JWS is okay for alpha releases for us to get things tested, right? That's the stance I want to.
Just something in the future, once Dizzy gets some checklist of whatever we decide is the right checklist, then we can come back and reconsider that.
Yeah.
That's my understanding as well. You know, so if we can, as the board starts getting updated outside of this hack doc, if we can have that reflected, because it's two things. One, it gives our teams, you know, the people focused on this project an execution steps on JWS and PKCS7, but it also lets the broader community that's very focused on Dizzy to know that, look, we're not against Dizzy, it's just not mature enough for what we need for production environments. When it gets there, we're happy to consider it.
Yeah, I think PKCS7 kind of offers the gold standard of what we would need for like a release, right? And so if Dizzy kind of has like a similar kind of backing for it or similar data, I think that's where, you know, it becomes another alternative to add in. And our stance on formats is as long as it meets this criteria, we're okay in considering it, right? So any additional standards there, it's going to help us kind of build more resiliency here.
Just a couple of things.
Yeah.
Just on the release side, I just want to clear up one thing, and I don't know, it's not kind of covered in here. You kind of go alpha, beta, RC. In the you know, the way I think about at least binary releases, I would do some kind of SIMVER and then some kind of stability marker alpha, beta, stable. So, you know, when I think about alpha, you know, I'm not thinking about 1.0.0.alpha, you know, dash alpha right now. I'm thinking of 0.1.0 dash alpha right now, which is like pre-stable. We don't have any stable releases out there right now, but we need to get something with some limited amount of functionality that's non-backwards compatible before we have some kind of, you know, stable release. So, you know, I just don't want to park a whole bunch behind, you know, 1.0.0/alpha. We can start today with partial features that accrue to some value, but don't meet, you know, a stability marker, which is, you know, something I defined. And also, you know, statements about support and backwards compatibility of those different, you know, following something like SIMVER. So I think, you know, that gives us more flexibility. So the target here is we plan for 1.0.0, which is once we get a stable release out, what is the thing we want to ship and say that we'll support. In my doc, I basically say up until that point, we're not supporting anything until we have the first stable release. So that gives us, you know, a whole bunch of wiggle room. And, you know, I've worked on projects which, you know, for the last year and a half don't have a stable production release, but we're still making, you know, 0.1, 0.2, 0. So we're working up to get to a 1.0. And, you know, something like PKCS7 is a 1.0, but it may not be a 0.1.0. So I just wanted to call that out. Is that how you're thinking about it too? So we'd have stability markers. We could have 0.1.0-alpha, and we get that to, you know, stable release, but 0.1.0 is not something we'd say is production ready.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what we're really trying to scope out here is what is going to go out in that 1.0.0 stable release, right? That will tell us what we need to release alphas for here. But as you pointed out, like
we cut that down into chunks, and then they are all, you know, project or a milestone with a, you know, set of deliverables. So yeah, that was my thing. And then the other thing, you know, off the release, off the signature format, I think whatever you implement first, we should, I think you've said this before, Niaz, we should define the criteria for what the subsequent format is. So the value is there, if we're implementing, doesn't matter what we're implementing, make a decision. Define the criteria for subsequent ones that have to meet that min bar. So that if somebody wants to come along and say, well, you know, I want to give you DISI for free, I'll implement it, they're not in this room, we can say yes or no.
Well, we can,
Yep.
they need to have a list of steps of this is the bar it needs to meet.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think we're all at the point, like we recognize the value. It's just, I think there's a difference between the standards that people hold for a development environment versus a production environment.
And
I
on the
think,
Yeah,
signature release, on the signature for, sorry, Niaz, you go. Sorry for cutting you off.
Oh no, so I was gonna say, like, you know, rather than signature format 1, signature format 2, I see this almost as like a signature format. There is one in the first stable release, and then additional signature formats. There's a spec for this in the first release that calls out how are we adding new things in. So for additional signature formats, Samir, I would lock like a spec is what we would need for the first release.
Yeah, to be
This is the f-
support, exactly, support for additional formats. And I'm thinking, you know, sign -- format, PKCS7, DISI, and there's a standard interface that code goes through and it figures out how to format it for that signature type. But it should be not the next name version. It should be just support signature and format.
Yeah, so I think I added a new action item saying a spec for additional signature format must have the spec ready on at launch time or at release time. Okay.
Yeah, additional, you should probably also, to validate that, have a second implementation by 1.0. So it's not just whatever you start with. If it's JWS, you have PKCS7 out the gate too, not just the spec.
So you're saying at the end of the alpha release must have the spec ready for the additional signature format, and at the time of the first release have that additional format be available.
Yes, and when you say alpha, are you meaning alpha of the 1.0 target release or alpha?
No, alpha of 0.1.
No, I don't think you can just have the spec ready then.
Okay.
But
Yep.
I don't know, you might be able to.
I think we can move on to the next one then. I think I can clear it up. If Milan's on the call, signature payload format and signature manifest format. Niaz, if you can speak to the differences here.
The payload format you definitely need. The manifest format, I think, goes more into
I'm on
how
the
the
call.
signatures. Go ahead.
Yeah, the payload format, at a minimum, we said we'll sign the image descriptor, but there's other metadata that needs to go into that. The current JWS signature doc gives some examples, but we didn't settle down on what that wrap payload looks like. So it's finalizing that. And the signature manifest, the work done in ORAS defines what a artifact manifest looks like, but what the specialized one for a signature manifest looks like, that isn't defined yet. What that means is like, how do you put in metadata in the signature manifest for the subject or for correlating between your trust store and the certificate that created the signature.
So I think we need that for a first release, though, right? Like I think there's some core functionality you miss out if that's not part of the first stable release.
Yeah, this needs to be part of the release. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, confusing myself. Okay, let's look at the next two: the expiry of signature and expiry of certificates.
I think those are essential for first release as well. Steve, Lockie, your thoughts?
I think, yeah, having an expiry and of the signature and the certificate is essential, but yeah, revocation is not.
Okay, I will make the change. So
we can talk about revocation.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think this is where we have a chance to discuss the public and private scenarios. I think revocation needs to be very clearly like on our roadmap to get right as soon as possible. What is as soon as possible is TBD. Like,
I think as long as we have a spec ready at release, it gives us a degree of confidence as to like what effort is needed to kind of launch this. So I would say we want to push for at least the spec.
Yeah, another way I was kind of thinking about this, which might come back to the same answer, is I'd like to be able to say we could start storing signatures with the assumption there's some durability and reuse of them in the future. So meaning whatever, and I don't know the details here, this is like the crypto experts to chime in, but what do we need to have in the signature format so that we can do the revocations we want to do? This way, when we add revocation, the signatures don't have to change format. We just start adding, the notation library now supports, revocation of content that was already signed a month ago, whatever that timeline is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, typically if you're doing sort of like the certificate based signing, like there is a CRL endpoint that's included within the certificate metadata. There's potentially, if you're doing signature level revocation, that's going to need some endpoint that's also marked off in the signature. And so that's why I think like if we have a spec at release, we can start thinking about how that's going to impact any of the other components. I think beyond the spec, everything else should really be implementation and things we can pick up afterwards. But if we know how it's going to work, I think we can address some of those questions.
I think for the revocation, it's a bit beyond the spec in terms of having the extensibility point built into notation such that it can call externally provided revocation mechanism. Basically, an interface that says is X revoked, and that anybody can implement and give an answer of whether that's revoked or not. I think that is the extent to which I'm looking for, and whether that is broadly implemented or not, that's based on each implementer.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Yep, that's a level of detail we can capture in the actual issue we create for this. We can capture that there.
So it's a spec plus implementation in notation for the extensibility point for revocation checks.
In the signature formats for revocation check, right?
No, as part of the validation to be able to make the revocation check call. And if that is a no op, that is a no op. It's not supported.
Okay, sure.
Here's one way to think about it, and again, you guys test if this is reality. In Rev 1, I'm going to avoid labeling the quality to it. In Rev 1, we can sign content. You could sign and validate the content. In Rev 2, maybe Rev 2, we can start doing policy around how the validations are done. I'll just use that. In Rev 3, we could start doing revocations over the content that was pushed in Rev 1. I'm hoping that you guys have enough, I'm hoping that you personally, that the technologies have enough expertise that we can just leverage so that we have confidence that whatever we ship in Rev 1 that doesn't do revocations yet can be the kind of content we can do revocations over in 3. But if we can do something like that, then we can start doing incremental value where they can sign, they can validate, we can give them better ways to do policy, and then we can start doing revocations for the larger, more complex ones, because it's going to take a while for Docker Hub, ECR Public, and us and MCR to get the process of signing all that content and, and all of those steps. So if we can start signing content without revocation, I think we'll be good. And then the bigger ones that must need revocation to work will have time to evolve.
Yeah, I think Steve, to kind of really kind of have that amount of faith in Rev 1, you also need the spec for for revocation to be done. And I don't think we necessarily want to block early releases just on that, right? I think that's why it's important for the stable release, is that we know that whatever is being signed with the stable release are things that we can come back and revoke. And so almost like Rev 1 in your mind is what I'm looking at for the first stable release, where we know that the extensibility points are there. So the concept of the way signatures are done today and what we can use, there's no standard format that we can use for revocations and be comfortable with it. Is that what I'm kind of hearing? I think there's design details we'd need to kind of like flush out, which would be speculating at this point. I think, you know, once that spec for revocation is done, we'll know exactly what's needed here and how that's going to work.
So
Yeah,
what do people think about then reversing that order in the sense that we have a very low level way of doing config today? I like the policy approach, but would that help us maybe push revocations earlier and then do policy after?
I think how we sequence things between now and the first release, like that's a good discussion to have, but let's get to it once we have the full list of things we want for the first release.
Fair enough.
Let's keep going here. Let me go back to TSA signature, timestamping, and multiple signatures.
Sorry, I cut off Lockie. So, do you want to?
No, I was just going to say, my hope is somehow you could leverage some PKI off the certificates and not have to reinvent a lot of the wheel. So the fact that you're using certificates, you don't have any certificates makes this interesting because you don't actually need certificates to do the signature. It's the key. It's a way to do key transport. And you've got mechanisms to leverage there, like CRLs. And I'm wondering how much interplay we can pin off, you know, not having to build a completely new revocation infrastructure globally, and be clever about, like, if we got certificates here, can we leverage them rather than, you know, differentiating between key revocation, signature revocation, and certificate revocation. Again, I'm not a crypto expert, but I just know that building infrastructure around revocation is a lot of work. So if you can piggyback off any established protocols by using PKI, you know, I would hope that we could leverage some of that, even in the earlier stages, and say, hey, we'll do CRLs, but, you know, signature or keys is something different.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think my stance is very similar on that area. I think the challenge here is that revocation for code signing certificates isn't as well defined as it is for TLS, and so those are just some of the gaps we'll need to kind of close on here. But yeah, the certificates, the signing signatures, as long as we're doing timestamping like that, all simplifies it. And so I think that's one of the reasons I would say probably a timestamp signature or a TSA signature would also be a must-have for the first release, because it simplifies the PKI management and how we look at revocation as well going forward.
Okay, I think based on that, I think this makes more sense than for TSA signature must have a first release, the specification part.
Just to kind of close on revocation, I think revocation of keys, I don't understand why this one is needed. I would think signatures and certificates cover it. And so I think this one, I'd want to understand the use case better before we say this is something we'd want for a first release.
Yeah, and yes, the way I was thinking about this is some customers who don't use certificates just use keys, and their key has been compromised. So what is the process for them to say, I never use certificates?
Why would you not use a certificate here is, I think, the question I'd push back on.
There's no good reason. Yeah, I agree with you.
Well, so the thing that I've heard before is, like, you know, like you need to pay for a certificate, which isn't true, right? Like you can do a self-signed certificate and just say, here's how I'm going to set up my PKI. And I think that, like, a key itself doesn't give you any information as to who it belongs to. And so I don't necessarily think this is something that's a first release feature that we need to look at.
Yeah, I would question if that even needs to be on the roadmap, but it'd be an interesting use case. But I think when you're wrapping things up in certificates, keys bear less meaning. And, you know, for usage, like code signing, you have some, you know, you have some process that's doing it, not individuals. Key management is kind of an individual problem, but you would have some kind of, you know, process that creates a certificate against some verified, you know, CA that you trust. And then, you know, you generate the keys and get that thing to do the CSR and publish your certificate. But I just think if we're going to use certificates, leverage as much of that infrastructure as you can, because
Yep.
you don't actually need them. And I know, Dan Lawrence has been saying, why are you putting certificates here? And I'm like, because you don't have to manage all the life, you get all that infrastructure and not have to build all the tooling around lifecycle management. That is a big nightmare.
Yeah, I think based on that, I'm leaning on for this discussion. Again, it's a draft. People will can comment on it further. I'm striking it out for right now. The next one was interesting. This was for revocation of individual artifacts. We are saying one artifact for some of the other reason. It's not the entire certificate, not the entire, just one individual artifact needs to be pulled.
Could you leverage an expired or an expired certificate or signature to say that that's no longer valid, and if it doesn't pass that check, then therefore. But I don't know whether you need to revoke the image. It's just to validate the signature against the image. I don't know.
Combine that. Yeah, I would combine that with revocation of signatures.
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, I'll merge it. So I'll strike this and then. Okay.
I mean, it would be interesting if you're a registry to say this thing pass the index and say this thing no longer has a valid signature, so I'm going to purge the content. I don't know, but I don't know if you want to put that in the notary notation client.
Yeah, I think what Milind said, if the revocation of signatures, which are specific to a given artifact, we can use that to do the same thing.
Okay.
Let's move on to the, of course, this first one we have to do. I think this is a must-have. Signature verification. We need that. So for the team, I'm just gonna say this is a must-have. The next one is with scoping. The first one is without any scoping, as we were discussing last time, adding scoping. So we don't have to worry about scoping for the first release. This is a proposal I'm putting in front of all of you. But the next one is with scoping.
I think my question about that is the word policies. Are these inbuilt policies, or is it delegated to a policy endpoint? Is it, hey, we'll ship some inbuilt policies like, must have this CN or must have this, or is it?
No, what I was thinking about here is this is a signature verification policy. So in your orchestrators, where you specify in the cluster saying which certificates to trust, and there, if you want to limit or narrow the scope down.
Is that even a problem for notation to solve?
I think you guys are talking a little past each other. Let me try. Maybe I'm wrong. Today, we just have a set of certs as a path in the config. What I've been seeing in the conversations is there's like this overall config file or a file that has been referred to as a policy that has a collection of signatures that are allowed. And the idea is that thing, which we've been referring to as a policy, can be used in different places. Did I do it justice?
Yeah, I would add in these are customer defined policies. So I would call this support for customers to define policies without scoping and for customers to define policies with scoping. So we aren't necessarily shipping inbuilt policies here. And I think the with and without scoping, it should be a simple enough ask where I think we can have both for the first release. It's at least the way I understood it. It's like, how do we parse the language and how do we enforce it? But to me, there are enough use cases where I think it's good to have the with scoping as an optional for the first release. Like Milind or Sajay, from your take on it, I don't think Sajay is here, but Milind, for your take on it, is there a big technical difference in one and the other?
I think it isn't a technical difference. It's more of a usability and how to make the policy language work. From the scenarios that we discussed in the open source call, there definitely seem to be valid scenarios where you want to phase in where some things are signed, some things are not, or on a developer desktop where again things are mixed, and you want to say things from this repository should be signed and treated this way, whereas things from this other repository are also signed, but when they fail verification, you want to react in this way. So I think there were enough use cases called out to say this is something we should go with. And I think we should do the without scoping, let that bake, get more customer feedback while we define the with scopes.
I think what you mean by baking, like, when we're talking about a first stable release, like this is one where I would look at a first release as if we even came back and didn't make any changes to notation for another year, would be okay with whatever came out, right?
Okay. Okay. What I meant by first release was alpha early releases for
Yeah.
feedback.
So I think this for now, I think we can track this as an optional, which is this would be my suggestion. Let's track this as optional. If we find down the road there is some very significant technical implementation challenge or something else here, and we need to cut it, like this is one of the things you would look at cutting, and which is why it's an optional to have. But I think this is a very strong feature to include.
Okay. And I think the next one is just a corollary of the one above. I think Milind just talked about it, that if you want to run a mixed environment of signed or unsigned images, or signed from one registry, unsigned from the other registry, which is what we just covered with number 15. So I think we addressed this. So I
think,
will.
Sorry, it would be good to keep that separate.
Yep.
Because there are ways we could do it without, or I would like to track it separately.
Okay, let's track it separately then. But this is also a must for a first release, because we know for a fact that customers will have a mixed workload.
Hold on. What is the use case for this?
It's the classic migration use case, Nias, but not everybody will have their images signed. All of those images signed they have in their application on day one. So how can we say, okay, these images are the signed images you allow, and you still allow some unsigned images to run?
How's that different to policy?
What
Yeah.
what is the security like guarantee that it would give a customer if we allow any type of image to be run? Or so you're saying you can specify like certain unsigned images, and like how would we specify them? Would that be their image URI or something else?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it can be a mix of those things. How do you specify those exceptions? That is not is not yet defined. But like
right?
one of the
Exception.
feedback from Brandon was that this is one aspect where Notary V1 customers had challenges because it was either everything is signed or not, and that made adoption difficult.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to me, it's still, how is it different to 14 and 15? Are you building some separate code path that's not policy? Because I thought that's what policy would solve. That's my question.
So scopes is more, scopes also controls, even with signature verification, like for example, you can say, if revocation check fails, disregard, or if signatures are expired, disregard. So it's more detailed.
Yeah,
Whereas
I
this
just
is
thought
a very
without scope.
specific, yeah, this is a very specific, the 16 is a very specific feature to say, how do I do mixed consumption?
I would echo Lockie and say sort of like, what are you delivering in 14 and 15? It's not spelled out. So when we talk about scoping becomes one aspect of how to apply the policy. But everything else that's in that policy should allow you to do what 16 is telling us we now need to do separately, is the way I initially read it as well. So I think this, a question like, does this need to be tracked separately, or is this something that you're tracking as part of 14 that this also needs to be able to handle?
I think we haven't defined what is the end mechanism for these is, right? These are features and we are just classifying them. So we are saying even if scoping doesn't make through fully, which like with rich feature set, we should have some primitive mechanisms to allow mixed consumption.
Yep. To me, this is almost like your policy needs to allow this. However you make the policies work needs to allow this, right? And so it seems like it's a requirement for 14 rather than a feature is what I was getting at.
Yes, I think we can definitely go with that approach as well. Yes.
Yeah. The way I'm logically thinking, it'd be either a file open or a file closed with your named repositories above it. And you would say, I want it file closed. And if it's not signed and not in this list, then we don't allow it. Or it's in this list and signed or not, and we allow, fail open, fail closed. Just how do you utilize the basic policy engine to do a fail open, fail close with some named policies? That's how I'm reading it.
Yeah, I think it's in the implementation, but I think the use case we all agree on that the use case is that customers will be migrating and they may have a reason to allow some images signed and some unsigned.
Well, that's fine, but if 14 doesn't do that, then I'd question what the hell is 14 doing. So that's
I
my
agree.
statement.
Well,
how is it
well,
different to 14?
well,
Unless
so
you're saying policy is some completely different code path and we're creating, if you want 16 in, then I'd push 14 and 15 off the must-have list.
I agree. I think this is an implementation level that can be done depending on the implementation we have. I agree with that. Okay, I think we are doing well here on time, but still, we can kick up at one gear. User-defined signed metadata. I think, Milan, this was something you and I were discussing at one point. I had the notes from it. What do you think about this one? I think this is a must-have because as we said, some customers will like a flexible arrangement because we don't know how they run their orchestrators. If there's any user-defined metadata, it's going to help those customers. We can't solve all use cases.
I think given like this is something where a user-defined metadata is also going through user-defined validation, right? And so just having the extensibility of how to provide this and how we're going to support it should allow it. You may not necessarily need the notary client itself to be able to kind of do this, right? So I would say this is one where we want to have the spec ready at release and the extensibility in place.
It would, and again, crypto experts might just understand what this is, but I'm not exactly sure I understand what the use cases are for that. So maybe just some write-up of some sort will really help for the context of, because there might be some infrastructure that just makes this easy, or I'm just completely unaware of what needs to get done here.
So this, just for a short summary, is we're agreeing on a certain specific set of fields for the signature format. If someone wants to add in custom fields that they need for their own validation, this is giving them a path to do that.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out if we can just write it up a little bit, like what some of the example use cases are, because this might be something that could be in the annotations of the manifest, or probably not actually. So this will be good just to understand more, because then maybe we just need to add some parameters to the notation sign CLI, and and then the notation verify knows how to pull them back out. It might be super simple if we can just write it down. And
we had few examples in the signature format doc, things like either plain metadata like build or like test passed or not, that you can pass off to other policy validators after your basic signature validation is done. And they need to be signed attributes, which is why they cannot go in the plain annotation.
No, well, there are certain places you can put annotations where they do get signed. So that's what I'm just trying to figure out.
Okay.
So I just having concrete use cases instead of abstract ones of foo and bar kind of thing really helps think through where things need to be and do we have the right extensibility. So because there's another set of attributes you don't want to sign, because those change over time and then that invalidates your pieces. So just making sure we have both would be great.
Yeah, these are basically extended. You can think of them as extended claims that customers would want to do on the code that is not part of standard claims, like when does it expire or when it was signed.
But if we can just get those written down as a scenario, that'd be great.
Yeah, I will go back and check if it's there in the signature format specification. If not, we'll add it there. Number 19, adding signature verification keys and certificates in trust store. This is the obvious one, like, there'll be a trust store somewhere and how it's implemented, it's outside here, but it has to be there on day one. This was a gimme. Anybody disagrees on that? This being a gimme?
I think that's like way up in the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, I was structuring it in a different manner.
You can reorder later. I mean,
For sure. Number
I mean,
20.
I would just say you could tease that out against leveraging certificates as much as possible.
I agree with that. I agree.
So, you know,
Yeah,
you
I can
could
do that.
start with, hey, we can do certificate trust store, but if you're going to build a signature trust store and manage that, that's a different piece of work.
Signature trust store. I haven't come
Well, you
across.
say signature verification keys and signatures and certificates in trust stores. So I'm assuming certificates in trust stores, fine, but what's signature verification
Oh,
keys in
no,
trust
no.
stores?
My bad. I meant adding keys and certificates. Let me just, if I remove this word here, will it make it more readable? Adding keys and certificates in trust store. But as we discussed, why do we need keys? Everybody can use certificates. So
Yeah, I would just remove the keys for now.
let's remove keys.
Okay, yeah. So you could say as long as it's signed by this CA, the certificate, then we trust it on this host.
Yes. Or it could be a
Okay.
self-signed certificate as well, right? If somebody has a
Yeah, as long
self-signed.
as you added it to the trust store, yeah. Mhm.
Yep.
I'm okay with that, yes.
Okay,
do
cool.
we have the delegation stuff in here?
No, I thought delegation was primarily for not container image signing, but for a tough. Maybe I'm mistaken on that
And
one.
maybe I'm using the wrong term because this is again where I sometimes don't understand the details. The idea that there's a root cert versus leaf certs, and somebody might trust all of Microsoft signing, but others might say I only trust the .NET tree of signing.
Yeah, I think where we landed on this one earlier on in the discussion, and maybe worth revisiting, was that we'd look at PKI management outside of notation, right? Because there's a standard way of managing PKIs, there's a standard way of creating intermediates, and so we didn't really feel the need to kind of dig into it. And we're giving you the option of like, you can put in a leaf, intermediate, root, whatever you want in the trust store. So we're leveraging standard PKI techniques here. So I think we're okay in not saying, this is how you need to do delegation. We can have a doc for it, but I don't think we need to get like tooling for it.
And maybe this is where we just needed what do you call it? The definitions and terms. So and I love, just like Lockie was pushing on the other one, like not reinventing the wheels where things exist. Perfect. So if there's some PKI infrastructure that's in place that supports this, let's just document that's what we're depending on for this. And we think that's good for X, Y, and Z. And this is where we can deal with the.
Well, the thing is,
So-
there's lots of ways of doing PKI, right? And so there's lots of tools out there. I think the part here is more, how do we talk about the generic steps you would have to do, right? So AWS has private CA, which allows you to do this. Azure may have different offerings that allows you to do this. And so there's different ways of managing PKI and different tools for it. OpenSSL lets you kind of like, go create your own sort of hierarchies if you want to. And so I think the thing here is like calling out, how do we expect you to manage your roots and intermediates? What's a good practice? I think we can put in a good like entry on that. But beyond that, like the actual tooling, I think like, I wouldn't want notation to kind of stray into that area.
I think you might be talking about different areas. The one is, how do you create these hierarchies and what is the tooling? And second is, in notation, assuming you already have the hierarchy, what does the signature and the validation support? And we have already accounted for that in the signature format. We say there is support for storing the certificate chain. So the signature has certificate chain. And in your trust store, you can put in the root, intermediate, or whatever level you want. And then the verification should work correctly. So if you have, so the same image with that same cert chain, you can, on the verification side, you can say, I trust if it's from a root, which means all of the things under that root are trusted. Or you can say, I only trust this team's signing certificate. So it's narrowed down. But how those hierarchies are created is out of scope because different people have different tools, etc.
I think all that makes sense. I think I might just be looking for something much simpler. how would you do this hierarchy of a company and its products, or whatever the hierarchy it is? Like if that's what I would think of as one requirement. I know there's some other requirements that Tough tries to solve with, short-lived keys and so forth. I think if we can tease out those different requirements, that'll help figure out which ones we're trying to solve with which implementation. Because I think the hierarchy of products that a company might release would, or repos that Docker Hub would put into their Docker certification program. Like somebody might want to trust all Docker certified images. Somebody else might want to only trust the Nginx image. So I think we can call out those scenarios, then we could say the existing, I think what you're saying is the existing PKI infrastructure can solve that. Awesome. And then if there's another scenario for short-lived keys that we need Tough for, then that's a great opportunity for the Tough folks to say, here's how we add that requirement or solve that requirement.
Yeah, I think, like PKI is flexible enough that depending on how you choose to do things, you can do a lot of variety of different things, right? You may have someone who's doing like a ephemeral certificate, issuing a one-time use certificate and signing artifacts based on that. You may have someone that's doing like a 1-year certificate, and we consider different trade-offs. And I think this is where sort of like having some release note that says, think about your PK this way if you want to achieve this, think about it this way if you want to accomplish this, here's the trade-offs. But really beyond that, this is making it flexible enough for whatever the use case is that, you can configure your PKI to appropriately kind of address that demand. I think the part where I think it gets tricky is, with Tough, I see a role for sort of like managing keys where it's hard to kind of like delegate. Like if you're working in an open source group and you need a readily available tool, but there's other PKI tools that may just as easily do that for you. So I think leaving it outside of scope is part of that. PKI is flexible enough where you should be able to do all this. But hey, if we come across a use case we don't think PKI primitives can address, I think then it's that's the right time, I would say, let's bring something into notation for consideration.
You want to call out there's a difference in those two scenarios we talked about. What Tough provides is delegation while signing. You still trust the whole root and anything that comes off that root. But while signing, you say these areas of the registry, this person or role can sign. Whereas the other scenario that you talked about is for verification. You want to scope down the verification by saying, I trust anything that is signed by this org versus I trust anything signed by this team or this developer. That is at the verification side.
I think it's just a matter of like, there's lots of different answers. This is where we just got to go back to what is the requirement so that we can, I want to check off requirements. I don't want to check off solutions.
Sure. Yep. I think if we can have some scenarios that then we can detail out how do we support it, and if we don't support it, what does it take to support it?
Steve, I'm taking action item for you and I'll touch base with you later. If you can help me flesh out. I'll add the content if you can just point me in the right direction.
Sounds good, and I'll be right back.
The next one, I think we're done with the biggest section. Everything else will be downhill from here. Assigning and verifying other artifacts besides container images. We all know this should allow for us to sign anything, but from a day for the first release, can we just focus our energies on just signing container images? There's no reason why the other artifacts won't work, but if you're developing the SDK for it, if there are any changes required, can we just focus on container images is my request.
I think I actually want to hear from Steve because he knows more about the SBOM and other scenarios. At a high level, I don't see, as long as everything is stored as images and signature blobs, nothing in notation is tied to whether this image thing is a runnable image or some other kind of artifact.
Well, one thing I was thinking, again, I'm not expert here, but there's different media types or different types for different artifacts, and it will require us running regression tests.
No,
And-
well, that's what I'd push back on. Why is it different? It shouldn't be, because you're storing the signature as its own artifact. Like that's how we've approached all of this, right? You're not really
Yeah.
tampering with the artifact in itself. So if we can get this to work for containers, unless Milan tells me otherwise, my assumption is there's no incremental engineering effort to get this to work for any artifact type.
Yeah, I don't think from a signing or a notation per verification, after you verify the basic signature, there may be extended validation that you do for SBOMs. I think Steve can, if we can reiterate, Samir, I think Steve can provide more context.
I think that would be outside of the scope of this tool, the validation of SBOMs.
Right.
Yep, I think so.
But
I think
yeah, I mean, the only thing you'd be suggesting is, hey, we'd actually introspect the media type and say, this has to be a container image. And if not, I'm not signing it, but I don't see any value in doing that. It should be any blob you get pointed at, you can sign.
Yeah, it's just like this is really just taking advantage of all the work we did last year. Like we spent months trying to figure out how do we generalize this stuff, and the artifact reference types being able to sign things without an additional signatures was the outcome of that. So the payoff here is that line we get for free. Like we've already done all of that requirements and design work to be able to support that. And if there's something left that we didn't realize, that's why we want to get binaries out to still test it. But all of the prototypes that we've done say we could sign. If you can put it in a registry, we can sign it.
Okay, so I made this as I made signing other artifact besides container image a must have. It should just work. If it doesn't work, we need to know. But verifying as was mentioned, that it will vary depending on what artifact you're verifying. You may not even use a container orchestrator to verify the SBOM.
Oh,
Or-
Well, no,
I
hold
think
on.
I think the way to
requirements are to verify signatures. That's it.
Yep.
If you want to go verify an SBOM, that's a whole other tool.
So-
We will verify that the SBOM you want to verify is still signed, because there's no point in verifying an SBOM's content if you don't trust where it came from. So what Notation Notary does is says, this stuff has got integrity based on the entity that signed it. Now proceed as you want.
Yeah, I think the way you had it before, Samir, was right. It is one requirement to do signing and verifying other artifacts. Any validation you want to do on sort of like whether this is properly formatted as an SBOM is up to you. That's I think the distinction that Lockie was making. But signing and verifying should be the same, and that's something I think we should have for the first release.
Okay, so no incremental effort is foreseen here, right? If there is, then we need to know, and maybe that's a blind spot we have.
I think that kind of falls into the same as 15, where this is a nice to have for first release, and we're assuming that there is an incremental effort here. If we see significant incremental effort, that's a decision we can come back to at that point. But as of this point, I would say these are both in the first release, because in my mind, I'm not seeing additional engineering effort here.
Okay. Can I change it to nice to have? I know I'm disagreeing with the crowd here, but it will be there. It should work, but it's spending time and energy on testing it and verifying it X number of ways. It's just a proposal. Must have or nice have. Steve, I will let you have the last word on this. You want it to be a must have or nice to have?
Sorry, on which one?
On number 21, you want this to be a must have or nice to have for the first release? And this is the first stable release, not the alpha release.
I'm okay. Well,
I
it's kind of, you can label it any way you want, but we get it for free. So I think the question is, if it doesn't work, do we block a release? This kind of.
I think it's more, do you have test cases supporting that it works?
Agreed.
I think
Are
we
you
should have test cases supporting. I think the goal of notation is notation is agnostic of what the underlying content being signed is. So
Exactly.
it should be a must have. There is
Yeah,
no
just
extra
make sure we
effort.
have adequate coverage to say we support the signing of artifacts, and we just
Sure.
have a few different test cases. Here's a Helm chart. Here's a, I don't know, WASM module.
Yeah, and if those test cases fail for some reason, I think we can make a decision at that point to
Yeah,
whether
it's-
we
yeah.
should
We should
go ahead
triage
release or
it.
not.
It should absolutely be triage as opposed to just punt it. I think, and why this is important, just to put context, is like when we started, it was all about moving, copying content within and across registries. As we've evolved from that, you know, we're talking about storing S bombs and Git bombs and security scan results. So if it doesn't work, there's probably an indicator of underlying problem that we need to be aware of. So that's why I'm treating this as important, because I know we're all focused on a first priority of securing container images, and I get that, like that is the PRI 0000. It's just there's a 0.1 pretty quick around that for the other stuff related to it. So we believe
I think-
we've solved it. It's just
Yep.
that's what we want to make
No,
sure. It's
I agree. I think you've convinced me that this needs to be a must-have over a nice-to-have. I think we only have one thing that's left here, which is the multiple signatures. And if we get that, then the APIs and CLIs for everything we discussed needs to follow the same kind of cadence.
I agree.
And the
Let's
multiple
go.
signatures, I think we've also said that was part of the inherent design that came out of it. The piece that's been interesting, which is again why I want to get some bits working, is because there's some time stamping, not necessarily TSA, but time stamping in the signature. If I sign the exact same content multiple times and push it multiple times, I wind up with different signatures. It doesn't dedupe. So there's some interesting things that we want to sort out with that, because those will actually be multiple signatures from the same entity. But we need to be able to support the Docker Hub signature, the Wabbit Network signature, the Acme Rocket signature, all on the same artifact. So I'd say those are must-haves, because you need to be able to sign content after it was created. So I think that's one aspect of the multiple signatures that's a must-have.
Yeah,
one-
there are, yeah, go on, Steve.
No, I was going to tangent, but so go ahead.
So yeah, there's a split of use cases there. There is generation, storage, and retrieving multiple signatures, which we
And
need to
validation.
support, and validation. So validation is the interesting or more complicated piece where we can make a call whether we want to support validation for a single
Oh,
entity
you're
or
saying that you
multiple
have
entities.
to have more than one signature to consider it valid? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, which is more of nice to have.
I see.
But generating, storing, and retrieving multiple signatures, identify which is the correct signature to validate that all is required for the release. Because there are different kind of cases where multiple signatures will be generated through the different workflows.
How about I propose this, that for validation, we have the spec ready. But for multiple signature, this is a nice to have, and it should, because if you can't verify multiple signatures, then, well,
I actually think you don't need the spec ready for that one. Multiple signatures, generating and storing, that's a must-have for first release. And then the validation on more than a single signature, I think, is something we can look at for a future release. That's a nice to have, but it doesn't block any of the essential use cases we have seen. And so the way when you're generating multiple signatures today would work is you would find the one signature in that matches the policy. And rather than sort of like, looking at two different signatures, two different states, and combining them to reach a decision. Is that an accurate summary, Milind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So am I interpreting it right, Milind? Is that your recommendation that this could be a future item? Not, okay. Steve, your thoughts? So we'll generate the multiple signatures. You can verify at least one of those signatures, but if you want to have a compound case of verifying more than one at the same time, that's the thing which is pushing out.
No, I agree. That makes sense.
Okay.
The
Okay,
other ones that I had, that was keep myself from tangenting, was the signature revocation, not just key revocation or cert revocation, and then tag signing.
So I have signature revocation here, and I have revocation of certificates. We did agree on them. Must have the spec ready at release.
And then tag signing. It's not
Tag
just
signing.
digest, but tag signing.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, my bad on missing that use case. Let's put it here. Text signing.
And I'm not convinced it needs to be in the initial release. We've already scoped it out, but I just want to at least, we have an issue already that talks about tag signing. It's just good to capture, that's all.
Okay, will do.
And I'm curious what other people think, but you know, that has been one that's been sitting out there.
No, it makes sense to capture.
Yeah, I would get Shravan's take on this one before we rule it out from our side, Samir.
Okay, I will take an action item. I'll reach out to Shravan after this. Okay,
So
the next.
you wouldn't support tag signing out of the gate?
That's the proposal.
What does it
Yes.
mean to sign a tag is the problem.
No, I know. And I'm just thinking about the implications of that because, you know, I know we maintain code and gatekeeper to do tag to SHA resolution, but it's just, that's a usability thing, right? That now, how does
Yeah,
a
the
customer
way-
look up a
The
SHA?
mitigation has been that and this is not a standard across all registries. It's not a standard in the specs, the distribution specs, but if you do tag locking, which I don't remember if AWS supports, but it basically says that the tag is locked to a digest so that you are effectively doing that. And what'll happen is, because we always do sign the digest. So now if there's a new tag that a new digest associated with that tag, if that one got hacked, for instance, if somebody was able to hack a bad digest to a good tag, unless somebody stole the private key, that thing won't get deployed because it'll fail validation. So there's a couple of nuances that we think we're protected, but the other side is if the tag is locked, but you do want to update the tag because you should, update a stable tag, a unique tag to another new digest, and it's signed, then you get the break glass scenario where you could say, okay, I'm going to unlock that tag. I'm going to push an update to that tag. It's going to be signed with the proper key, and then I'm going to lock the tag again. So the fact that I have to explain it in detail that I do at this point is the nuance that we recognize makes it more complex, but registries don't, other than Notary V1, which is the whole sidecar thing, there is no great solution for tag signing today.
Okay, so what are all the other tools out there that do this too? They just they just go to digest and
Yeah,
under
you
the
basically
hood?
just pin it so you're deploying a digest. What we
So
want to
if
be able
I-
to do is you can
If
deploy
I sign
tag.
latest every day, latest gets updated every day, I sign it every day, cosign resolves the SHA.
Yeah, they're not doing, as far as I know, they don't support tag signing either. They have, I have to go back. I saw some reference
Well,
to
I
it.
think just the use case here is, does the user have to input a tag or does the user have to input a SHA? And if they input a tag, do we resolve it for them?
Yes, we do resolve tags to digest. That's
Okay,
what I'm
well
saying.
then I
You can
think,
deploy a tag, and as long as the tag resolves to a digest that is signed, you're fine. So that's why the security hole is resolved.
Okay.
Because if
Mhm.
you were trying to if you were signing tags, the idea is you're going to sign the new tag, and as long as the new tag is still signed, then you're resolving by a tag anyway.
Yeah. No, I get
So-
the security aspect. I'm more just the usability here. Are you going to throw an error and say, hello, you need to give me a SHA-256
No,
for
you can
engine
absolutely
X?
deploy by tags.
Okay, and it'll just do it one-time resolve. Okay, DNS style.
I mean, that's
document-
how it works today, right? That's just the way Kubernetes works
Yeah.
today as it deploys. And you should be able to, like your kube deploy scripts should be able to have a unique tag in them, and that's perfectly fine because that's what's human readable. You can debug it. Like nobody wants to read this thing that's going to double in this near future when we go to SHA 512.
I need to drop.
Okay.
Could you just let me know are you able to stay, Steve?
Well, we all have this 5:30
Yeah,
meeting, so
5:30,
we should
yeah,
probably
I
go 5
can't make
minutes
that.
and that's fine. But we even like for us, like, can we not go more than 5 more minutes and give us 5 minutes between this and the next meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, just let me know what the follow-ups are. Thanks, Samir and Niaz and Milind.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lucky.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I think the next section, as Nia said, is obvious. Based on what we agreed on the specifications, I can update what will follow in the actual library. And in the library, I'm saying the API and CLI go hand in hand. I see no reason that we'll implement the API, but not the CLI and vice versa. So they will go together. So I think what happens is that this gets pushed out, or part of it gets pushed out, and this is the only anomaly here on this use case. Signing with keys on localhost.
You can change, we can tighten up the definition here. You're essentially saying everywhere you're signing with a key and a certificate, it's a question of where the key and certificate is hosted, right?
Yes.
If the key and certificate is on the local host, that's number 2. That should be prioritized over number 1, which is one where you're using a PKCS 11 supported signing service, right? So whether that's Azure Key Vault or something else, then that's the second scenario. But I think that
I think
those two are, yeah.
I think the PKCS 11 scenario, I would like it to be just generalized to say cloud-based signing service instead of PKCS 11. At
How
least
are
looking
you
at
going
it,
So I think that's fine, but you have to be clear on what the interface is going to be to
yeah,
cloud-based signing services, right?
yeah,
PKCS 11 is a standard. If you want to use something else, this has to be sort of like a standard that's equivalent.
we can talk about that separately. It's basically an interface that we'll define for the tooling.
Yep. Some standard interface that anyone can work to is what I'm getting at. Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I think rest. I think I can update the doc. For Docker CLI, we know that we would like to do this, but at this point we are prepared to launch without these. So these are both nice to have for me at the moment.
Steve, do you agree with that?
Sorry, which one?
A plugin for Docker CLI so that people don't have to use a Notary V2 client or the notation client independently.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do that first. And even Justin was saying, look, no matter what we do with the Docker CLI is going to focus on verification first. But as with, I mean, even their own development, they do plugins before they do anything. They might default a plugin to be installed, like the BuildX plugins installed by default, but it's still a plugin model. So I think let's validate with the plugin model, because as with all of us, once we start shipping features in our services and tools, they're there to stay. So a plugin model is the way to prove the scenario works. And then as that experience evolves, they can decide how they want to integrate it.
I think the native integration can be removed or can be a future. Based on discussion with Justin, that doesn't seem that there'll be a native integration at all.
I mean, honestly, the way you say that is a good point. Like, we don't put what AWS is going to do or Azure is going to do. Like, this is what I think you're talking about here is Docker Inc. And that's not for us to decide.
Yep, agreed.
Yep.
So the open source community will not wait for that. Okay, makes sense. I think we're almost coming up on our boundary here. If we just push through these last two.
Documentation you can skip in this discussion. I think that's part I would look to as you kind of refine and merge this in with Lockheed's pull request, like how to address that, but we can skip that for now.
Yeah, the only thing I want to discuss is this then, Orchestrator integration. There are multiple ways to integrate with Kubernetes. Is there one which we will push forward first as a recommended or an example?
I think we want to have one mechanism as a must release, as a must have for the first release. I think anything else beyond that, which one is still TBD based on discussions that's going on. Is that a fair assessment?
I agree with that. And I don't know which one will work out as we collaborate on this in the open source community. I don't know, but yes, it's fair.
Steve, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, we've had engagement from Daniel and some others on OPA, and I'm drawing a blank of his name. He was doing the connoisseur work, Kevin, I think. So I think this is a place where we'll have the right engagement from the right folks, as long as we enable them with builds they can use. So I hate to beat the dead horse here, or beat the build horse.
Yep. I'm okay with one mechanism. Let's figure out what that right mechanism is, and we'll come back and make that the right one here.
Okay. We're done then, I think, for this discussion. Rest, everything else was just documentation, as we can cover that.
Okay, I think the next step here is Samir putting this together in a timeline and calling out what we're going to do, sort of like early releases. And so I would spend time with Milind and Sajay in understanding like sequentially how they're planning on building things, and what's already been built and can be shipped out, and we're close to an alpha. I think that's probably the next step here. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably what I would, just the way, knowing a little bit of how the boards work, is getting these things logged as issues and
Yep.
getting them in the board, and then create, what I think you can do is create milestones, and then we can assign these to milestones. That effectively becomes your timeline, because I don't think they have like a Gantt chartish kind of timeline thing, but they do have a way. If you just sequentially number them as by convention, it'll make sense.
Yeah, and I don't have permissions to do it on this one. I can make something ready for just a demo on Wednesday when we meet back as a group, and
That'd be great.
then we can just go forward from doing it in the real repo.
Just because I do need to drop off for the meeting.
Yep,
minutes.
sounds good.
Hugely
Thanks.
productive. Samir, thank you. This is like, we've been needing this for a long time. I have not been able to scale. I really appreciate all the details that you put in here today. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks.
All right, thanks.